If you go on the internet today and start reading on some websites about the Superman box office at the weekend, you'd think that it was the second coming of Christ. But this doesn't tell the true story at all. And in actual fact, how well did Superman actually perform at the box office this weekend? Hi everyone, it's Az here from HeelvsBabyface. Now, if Superman can take one legit W that absolutely nobody can dispute, it's the fact that, well, everybody's talking about it. Now that the film has hit the silver screen, a lot of people have gone to see it, and the discussion hasn't died down in the slightest. A lot of people seem to like it. A lot of people seem to dislike it, and that's causing some very interesting conversations. I did my review on it a couple of 3 days ago, and the TLDR is that I didn't think it was up to all that much at all. What I was quite surprised about was the reaction to my Red Sonja trailer, which seems to have done significantly better for some reason.
And grant me the power to find those who did this.
Okay, I guess sometimes we just need a stupid laugh at a stupid thing. However, things with Superman are actually a little bit more serious because this is the first live-action film in James Gunn's new DC universe, and it really does need to get off with a bang. Particularly because the second film is going to be Supergirl. So if Superman can't get out the blocks, how on earth is Supergirl going to? The box office projections were all over the place. They seem to sit at around 155 million for the domestic opening weekend, with a high of 175. They got revised to around about 135 to 155. Then some people were speculating between 90 and 120 something, but it seemed to sit somewhere in the region of 125 million to 150 million just before the film's release. So enough with the foreplay. Exactly how well did Superman perform over the weekend? Well, yes, it took the top spot with $125 million domestically, hitting the low end of what was expected. And internationally, it brought in 95 million. So it's done a $220 million opening weekend worldwide. And again, what exactly does that mean now? Was this a roaring success, or was it just okay? How is Superman ultimately going to perform in its cinema run? Variety ran with the headline of Superman soars to 122 million, third biggest box office opening of 2025. Now, 122 million was its projection. The numbers have now been confirmed on the Monday, so it has gone up slightly to that 125. They continue by saying that this was the third largest debut behind a Minecraft movie, which was 162 million, and Lilo and Stitch, which was 146 million. Interestingly, though, they do say this. Turnout was slightly softer than expected at the international box office, with 95 million from 78 markets, bringing its global tally to 220 million. Box office watchers say that they aren't surprised that Superman started stronger in the US compared to overseas, because the character's motto is truth, justice, and the American way, which you'd never know because A, they didn't market it that way, and B, it was never said in the movie at all. Maybe international markets like to see Superman represent truth, justice, and the American way. After all, you are going to the cinema to see a slice of Americana with Superman, and therefore to see the people creating it embarrassed to actually go the whole route, truth, justice, and the American way, can actually be reflective on what people perceive the movie to be like, and potentially a turnoff for them. And it's this weak international market, and believe you me, that was a weak opening in the international market that I think is ultimately gonna see where Superman lands. James Gunn seemed happy enough, question mark, parentheses everywhere, as he made this post on Threads. For some reason. I'm incredibly grateful for your enthusiasm and kind words over the past few days. We've had a lot of super in Superman over the years. That's because it's in the name, James. It's not man. It's Superman. Anyway. And I'm happy to have made a movie that focuses on the man part of the equation. I agree. There was definitely a lot less super in your film and definitely a lot more man. A kind person always looking out for those in need. That resonates so powerfully with so many people across the world is in itself a hopeful testament to the kindness and quality of human beings. Thank you. Well, it definitely resonated more with the domestic box office than the international box office, to the tune of $30 million. So let's make some comparisons, shall we? Because I do think these are important. Approximately a year ago to the day, I think it's only a couple of weeks difference, there was another superhero movie that came out, one that's maybe a little bit sillier than even Superman, and it was called Deadpool Wolverine. So how did Deadpool Wolverine perform at the box office comparative to Superman? Well, it had an opening domestic weekend of $211.5 million. So that's what, 86 million more than Superman did. And approximately the same amount of theaters. There's only about 80, 90 odd difference in the amount of theaters that they actually released in. So Deadpool and Wolverine having a substantially higher opening at exactly the same time of year and probably the same amount of marketing, potentially even a fraction less. Now, the Deadpool and Wolverine budget came in at about $200 million with another $100 million for marketing, which actually I'm pretty sure is way less than that of Superman. Anyway, it means that the movie has to hit somewhere in the region of $500 million to have made its money back. It did $1.33 billion at the box office and therefore actually was a huge W for Marvel. Let's just say they've been short on those for the last half a decade. Superman's budget seems to be all over the place. Some reporting as low as $225 million. Others, after seeing tax documents, saying it's up around the $360 million budget. Suffice to say, it probably falls somewhere between those. So, if we're being generous, it's most likely that Superman has to hit around about the $700 million mark to make its money back, production budget and all the marketing that surrounded it. And one thing that you can see with the Deadpool and Wolverine box office is that the domestic and the international kept pace. In actual fact, the international market was slightly higher to the tune of around about $70 million than the domestic box office. Let's make another comparison now, one that some might say is more in line with Superman. This is The Batman, a movie that came out about 3 years ago, a little bit over that. And that came in at the worldwide box office at $772.5 million. Again, with the international box office outpacing the domestic box office to the tune this time of about $30 million. And how did the Batman open comparative to Superman? Well, it opened with $134 million domestically. Yes, it's in about 300 more theaters than Superman, but this was March of 2022. So this is when the world is trying to recover, particularly Hollywood, from the pandemic. The Batman had a reported budget of about 185 to 200 million. So again, it had to hit somewhere in the region of 500-ish million to make its money back. So it did eke out seemingly a wee bit of a profit here. Now let's jump to another James Gunn film, Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Another film that I personally didn't care too much for. However, it had legs at the box office and it didn't have a particularly good opening either, especially for a Marvel movie. But ending its run on $845.5 million, even though it didn't work for myself, it's irrelevant. It did well at the box office and would have likely made itself a profit. Again, you can see the international box office absolutely dwarfing the domestic box office. $130 odd million more internationally than at home. And if we go down to its opening week, you can see it released to $118.5 million, which was not a strong opening, and that is only $7 million behind Superman, but Guardians had the power of the international box office. Now, I'm not trying to poo-poo over the movie for the sake of poo-pooing over it, because I personally didn't like it. If you like the film, and there are a lot of people which like the film, more power to you. I hope you have a great time and all that. What I'm trying to do is just cut through the gaslighting and cut through the bullshit and make sure that people's expectations are a little bit more realistic than maybe the media, the mainstream media, of course, would like to portray it as. Because you know that as soon as the final numbers come in and the dust has settled, the mainstream media will turn completely 180 degrees and all the articles will come out about how we knew it wasn't going to do this or that or the other. Because right now, it looks like this film is going to land in the worldwide box office at approximately 650 to 700 million if it doesn't have the legs that Guardians of the Galaxy 3 has. And if it does that, there's a good chance that the film's either going to just break even or actually lose money. And this is the first James Gunn DC film. This is the front foot forward, and that personally does not bode well for this DCU. But I'm also an agent of chaos from time to time, and so I have to do one more comparison. How well did Superman perform in its opening weekend versus Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, which came out 12 years ago? So coming out at approximately the same time of year, coming out in approximately the same amount of theaters as James Gunn's Superman, Man of Steel, 12 years ago, 12, a dozen years ago, managed to come in at an opening box office weekend of $128.5 million. And remember, the preview night back in those days didn't start, I think, until 10 p.m. So it had literally a 2-hour window to clock in some coin. So yes, Man of Steel from 12 years ago did a better opening weekend than James Gunn's Superman. Now, ultimately, it didn't have legs and it ended at $668 million. But again, if we were to adjust that for inflation today, something which drives people crazy because they just want to make like-for-like comparisons, that $668 million is around about 900 and something million in today's money. So James Gunn's got a long way to travel to beat Zack Snyder's Superman, regardless of how you feel about it. And I thought that this was a very average film as well. But even as apples to apples, it did a better opening weekend. So as the media tried to gaslight people that this is something absolutely incredible, the truth of the matter, cutting through the bollocks, is the fact that Superman has had a very average, steady, potentially weak international opening weekend at the box office. And if it is to do numbers, then it's got to have legs. So what's going to be more interesting is how Superman performs in the theater next weekend and what the drop-off rate is going to be. Because if it's a relatively high drop-off rate, 60-something plus %, the week after, the Fantastic Four movie comes out. And that'll likely knock it dead in the theaters because the new thing will come along. I'll see you in the next video. You take care. Goodbye, Baloo Boo.